So, Magnus Carlsen hung mate in 1. Welcome to the semifinals of the Bullet Chess Championship, the most elite bullet chess event held by Chess.com with a grand prize fund of $100,000. Magnus has been on a killing streak, absolutely dominating his competition, but in this round, Alireza Firouzja ended up taking the win. So let's see what we have. I'm going to show you a couple of games played by Magnus and Alireza. The first one is a game where Magnus actually had a very strong attack going and had the win, like, within arm's reach, but unfortunately blundered the game away. And then the second one, make sure you stick around, Magnus actually hangs mate in 1. Spoiler alert. Let's hop in. Magnus playing a fianchetto. King's fianchetto with c4, okay? Kind of like a Catalan, but also not a Catalan. All right, and in fact here, he invites Alireza to play e4 to attack the knight. And we see in these games, Magnus was in a knight-hopping mood, let's say. His knights had the zoomies a little bit, so he invites this to jump his knight into d4, and then he hops back to c2. We are 6 moves into the game, and half of those moves have been knight moves. To f3, d4, and c2. So, yeah. And here we see he actually does gambit a pawn in the opening. Alireza is up a pawn with hopes of winning it back or getting enough counterplay in the future to, you know, make compensation for that. But we see as the game goes on, Alireza just hangs on to the extra pawn. He's got his knight and bishop defending this. And where is the compensation? I'm not sure. We see that white has a clear target on e4, right? But this pawn is really preventing white from expanding in the center and maybe on the f-file as well. And the dark squared bishop has not come out yet, but we see that happening here. And yeah, the queen gets kicked back, and now black just has plenty of defense on this e4 pawn. And yeah, Magnus is struggling to find something here. So we have knight jumping back to d1 to take on f6, open up the king, and then play g4. What the heck is g4? It's not to play g5, it's to actually anchor in knight f5. And black takes, and now the king is open. Now the g-file is open, and maybe Magnus can get a rook to the g-file or lift it up this way and has clear attacking prospects on the king. And honestly, for just being a pawn down, this actually isn't looking too bad. So the knight jumps into d4, now the queen takes on e4, and Magnus has equalized material. We have bishop a3 hitting the rook on c1. The rook lifts. It's what it wanted to do anyway. You know why? It's going over here. The last couple of moves from Alireza were me attack rook, me attack rook. And then Magnus brings the rook over to h3, targeting the king side here. So what Alireza does is attacks the queen real quick, hitting the pawn here as well, and just making room for the king to escape. Because guess what? He's going to need it. The king runs, and e3. e3 entices the black knight to jump into c2. And Magnus has no intention of moving the rook out of harm's way, but instead sacrifices the rook to get this attack on the king. And he's right. This is absolutely crushing, because all he needs to do now after king e7 is play queen d5 check, king d6, queen d5 check, or queen e4 check, excuse me, and then queen d5 check, and then rook takes f7. And the king is just getting brutalized, and Magnus is going to win all the pieces. After rook takes, bishop takes, queen takes, bishop takes, Magnus would just be up 3 pawns. 1, 2, 3. And just be completely winning. But instead, Magnus does this the wrong way. He does not see queen e4 check, and instead takes the pawn on b5, which is losing because of rook g8, pitting the queen to the king. Now, you don't lose the queen, but you have to trade off all the pieces, like this. And now, Magnus never got the chance to win all that material, and is just down 2 points of material, and just lost. And not only that, but he doesn't see his bishop is hanging and plays king e2. And yeah, he resigned. So we saw in the last game, Magnus actually was doing pretty well and had a monster attack going, but it slipped through his fingers. Let's see what happens in this game. Magnus is playing with the black pieces, but let's look at this from Alireza's perspective, shall we? We'll make it even. Now, as I said in the last game, Magnus was in a little knight hippity-hoppity-hoppity mood, and so he plays the Alekhines defense, or Alekhines. I'm not sure how it's technically pronounced. I think it's Alekhines or something like that. Anyway, e5 attacks the knight jumps around, right? And this is the opening, is to invite white to take the entire center, and you're gonna chip away at it from afar and say, yeah, you've overextended a little bit. So let's see, we have d6, trade, and Alireza plays h3, okay, preventing the bishop from coming out. And, you know, we have pieces being developed. Alireza getting a great position out of the opening, taking the entire center, developing pieces very nicely. The rook is coming out. The bishop has, you know, a bunch of possible squares to go to. And Magnus is hopping the knights around to a6, to c7, in order to play d5. And Alireza closes the door. He shuts the center down, kicking the knight back, like this. And now the bishops and the knight and the rook and this knight are about to jump into the game. Magnus hops the knight back once again. He's really enjoying moving his knights around this round. So we have knight jumping into e5 with no competition, because he needed to, I think, get the light squared bishop out, and that's why he played this, also just for added defense to the h7 pawn, which was under fire. But knight e5, and nothing's contesting the e5 square. So Magnus plays bishop f6, looking to trade it off. But f4. f4 solidifies the knight so that after the trade, this center is just suffocating black. And Magnus tries to break out with f6, but after the f-file opens, who benefits? Who benefits from this? The f-file being opened and the rook getting in, the queen has to get kicked out, and now both rooks are on both of these open files. And I think white is benefiting from this. Also, the bishops are just slaughtering these diagonals here. So we have bishop d7, bishop to f2, rerouting to g3, and rerouting to e5. I mean, look at that. Look at that bishop maneuver here. Bishop drops back here, hits the queen. Here, aiming for e5. And now that g7 pawn is under fire. A few moves later, that could be a problem. So the knight jumps to g6, and Alireza takes without a second thought. Literally 0 seconds spent on this move. Less than a second. That's crazy. Normally, I would think you want to keep this light squared bishop, right? Because the queen and the bishop are doing a nice job. But Alireza realizes this pawn is well protected, and this bishop is much more important. He does not want this to happen, and he doesn't really want to move it because this doesn't really do much. So he chops the knight in order to keep the pressure on the dark squares. Magnus plays queen, I keep mixing the two. Alireza plays queen b3, shifting his attention over to the queen side. He's shifting his attack from the king side over to the queen side. And now Magnus has to try and deal with that, but Alireza just safeguards his king real quick, takes, and takes. Alireza's up a pawn. He's up a pawn. Not only that, that pawn is an outside passer. It's going to be a problem, because we have h6. And here Magnus actually blundered knight takes d5, which Firouzja could have played. And you can't take because you would lose your queen, and that would be very sad. So this would be another way for Alireza to continue, but instead he plays, you know, queen c7. You're going to blame the guy? I'm not. So we have bishop moving out to f5. We have an exchange of rooks, and the a pawn is going. That passed pawn is going to queen. It is 3 squares away from the promised land. Now, Magnus is getting some counterplay over on the king side, so Alireza decides to trade a couple of pieces, bring the queen back, and just make sure everything is in tip-top shape over here. The knight jumping back to e6, bishop e3, and the knight goes to a4 to help support the pawns moving forward. We see there is b4. And here, Magnus also blundered knight c3, which is a fork. Not technical. I mean, it's a fork, but you don't lose the material, right? Because you can defend it. But the problem is you kind of needed that bishop, right? Without the bishop, you're going to have some problems, right? The knight has to jump in here, and just bishop f4 to e5, and you're going to have some problems over here. And while you're busy defending against that, I'm going to start pushing. So you kind of need that bishop. Alireza doesn't see it. It's okay. He plays knight c5 instead. Looks like a pretty good move because now everything is locked here and you just have this one pawn. But we have opposite colored bishops right now. And this could be heading towards a draw. Even up a pawn, right? Because the pawn just gets blockaded. But a few moves later, we see Magnus could take a queen trade and be totally fine. You know, maybe king takes, right? And just be fine. It's an opposite colored bishop endgame. This is going to be a draw, right? There's not going to be a way to get this pawn moving forward. But instead, Magnus plays queen e4 and hangs mate in 1. Yeah. Just fully hangs mate in 1. And he played this move in 0.1 seconds. If he can do it, then I think we can all feel a bit better about ourselves, can't we? Here are the standings of the Bullet Chess Championship as of now. We see Magnus ended up losing this round 11.5 to 14.5. Alireza Firouzja moving forward to play against Hikaru Nakamura, who beat Daniel Naroditsky 20 to 12. So we have the finals set up here between Hikaru and Alireza. That should be a fun match. Thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. I really do appreciate it, as always. It would mean the world to me if you hit that like button and subscribed as well. I am trying to grow this channel, so any bit of support like that helps tremendously. Oh, and if you want to see Magnus and Hikaru dominate in the first couple of rounds for this Bullet Championship, make sure you check out this video up here. That's what I've got for you today. Have a great day, guys.